everyone. Welcome back to the Partnership Mastermind Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lavoie. And today's guest isn't just a veteran of the partnership wars. He's one of the few who's turned those lessons into leadership at scale. Rich Gardner helped build the partner ecosystem that took Klaviyo from 60 million to over 700 million ARR and into IPO territory. Now he stepped into the role as president at Pavilion, the global GTM community helping over 10,000 plus operators survive and thrive in a world of short tenures, AI disruption, and no predictable playbook. He's been a lawyer, VP of sales, partnership builder, and now a president, which means he knows how to navigate uncertainty, rally teams, and bet on what matters. And today we're going to reverse engineer that journey to help you out. Rich Gardner, welcome to the Partnership Mastermind Podcast.
Chris Lavoie, thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words of introduction. I should bottle that up and take it everywhere I go.
Well, we appreciate it. I'm extremely excited for this conversation, Rich. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time, having grown up in the e-commerce ecosystem. So thrilled for this conversation, and I know our listeners will be as well. We start each episode with 5 quick hitting questions to warm you up and give the audience an opportunity to get to know you. You ready for that?
I think so.
All right, cool. Well, just as a primer, Rich just got off his first board meeting with Pavilion, so we're going to do our best not to go too tough on Rich, but I know he's up to the task. Cool. All right, first things first. What's the most surprisingly useful thing that law school taught you for your career in biz dev and partnerships?
Oh, for my career in biz dev and partnerships, persuasive writing. You know, I think law school, a lot of what you have to do is write about legal decisions and do so in a way that's quite persuasive. Great writing is also necessary for great partnerships.
I couldn't agree more. In grad school, as a PhD chemist, my roommate and best friend is a lawyer, and he was going through law school at the same time I was going through grad school, and he'd be listening to me, reading my stuff, and he's like, "Dude, you need to step up your game." And so I can vouch for that. Next question: what is your favorite memory that first comes to mind from your tenure at Klaviyo?
My favorite memory from my tenure at Klaviyo would be sort of a strange one, but it's coming up to my brain. So in my first 6 months there, we all flew, not all, but several of us flew to Amsterdam for a Meet Magento conference. Remember Magento? Those were the days. And you did hear me say we flew to Amsterdam. So needless to say, yes, a lot of Magento stuff happened, but a lot of fun was had. And because I was still new to the business and the team, it was just a great bonding experience and was a lot of fun.
I love that. Well, that's why we ask these questions, because it's just about the first thing that comes to your mind, which we love. Next question is about your kind of new post. What is something that people just get totally wrong about Pavilion from the outside that maybe you want to set the record straight on?
I think people on the outside might see Pavilion just as an online learning platform, and it is. It's a great place to learn. We have CRO school and CMO school and partnership school and great online learning opportunities. But Pavilion at its core is a community. And so the online, people should think about Pavilion maybe as starting with the online learning, and that might be your entry point. But the community of operating executives like you and I have been, Chris, that's the reason to stay at Pavilion.
I love that. And we're going to certainly unpack a lot of that later on today. Second last one here. This is a personal one for me. The first time I met you was in Chicago at Catalyst a couple of years ago. Been a big fan of yours. You're one of the biggest names in my industry. So I was just thrilled. And I remember seeing you at one of the networking kind of mixers, and I mustered up enough courage to go introduce myself to you. And you're super kind. And I looked at you point blank and I said, "Hey, Rich, knowing that I want to get to your level one day, what is the number one tip you would give me?" And you didn't flinch, and you said, "You need to know the P&L and your department's balance sheet cold." You snap answer. And I took it to heart, and I was like, okay, I totally get that. And I really lean into that. So I'm just curious, could you unpack that for the audience, right? Why might that have been something that you just defaulted to right away?
Because I think, I'm going to generalize a little bit, but I think partnerships leaders like you and I, Chris, we often don't get the same level of business training that other functional leaders get. Sales, marketing, come to mind.
A little watered down.
it's a little watered down, and so like the way CEOs experience partnerships leaders is kind of like watered down. It tends to be folks who don't bring hard metrics to a conversation. They don't know how to talk about the unit economics of their business. They talk about clear impact partners are having, but can't measure it with math, and then try to get the CEO or the board or the CRO to invest in partners. And that's a recipe for failure. And so what I've learned is that it's really important for me when I was, earlier on, to be able to talk the language that CEOs and board members and CROs talk, not just talk the language of partnerships. I mean, that's a given. It should be talking the language of business. And that really starts with understanding the unit economics of your part of the business. How profitable is it? If you put $1 into it, how much comes out of it? And being able to talk about those numbers.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And Bob Moore, Crossbeam CEO we've had on the pod, that was a big part of what he was talking about. He's like, look, like, he said the easiest signal of whether or not your partner program is doing well is the company willing to invest more, right? Like a lot of these companies are just kind of plateauing and they're not really growing much. But if your company's investing in you, it's because you've shown them, from a leadership perspective, you've shown them an investable program, because you do have those firm understanding of the unit economics and how $1 can correlate to 2. So I think that resonates well. Cool. Last one here, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes is, and we always end this question with this question. If you weren't in tech, what's one alternate career that you would just totally see yourself doing? Like, just forget about tech, forget about the corporate environment. Like, what's non-corporate thing that Rich would be doing?
Teaching. Teaching. I love teaching. I'd like to think that some of the work that I've done with the teams I've been part of and folks that I've worked with over the years, that might not call it teaching, but some of what I did,
Coaching.
some of what I was teaching. And so that's probably what I'd be doing.
I love that. Well, look, I know several folks who have reported directly to you or skip away, and that's one of the first things they talk about is just your emphasis on kind of the upskilling and getting the team in the right place, which we will talk about in a bit. But cool, let's get the training wheels off now. Let's get into the fun stuff. And I'm honestly,
right.
I'm so thrilled because we're going to start with Klaviyo. You have so many great stints in your career. We don't have several hours to unpack it all, so we're going to skip ahead a bit. And we're going to start with Klaviyo.
You keep making me sound old, Chris. All this talk about my career. Okay, but keep going. Yeah,
just productive. So let's take it back to Klaviyo, and I want to start at the beginning. Like, when you joined, right? What were you actually walking into? Like, help put our listeners into the state of things, because we all know Klaviyo now as this behemoth, but I'm old enough to remember when Klaviyo wasn't this, giant $1 billion run rate, publicly traded. So like, when you joined, what were you actually walking into? What were you being hired for specifically? And how real was the belief in partnerships at the point that you joined?
Yeah. Great questions. So when I joined Klaviyo in the spring of 2019, Klaviyo was a $60 million ARR business, maybe 300 employees. Today, it's about $1 billion, and I'm going to guess 3,000 employees, something like that. And then the partner function specifically, and Klaviyo was not the winner in the space, in the marketing automation space. If anybody, it was MailChimp. And MailChimp had a very close partnership with Shopify, and MailChimp, very successful business in and of itself, but had grown tremendously within the Shopify ecosystem. And Klaviyo was a rising contender, but by no means was the leader in the clubhouse, so to speak.
Right.
So I walked in. That was the state of the business. The business was doing pretty well, a few thousand customers, maybe 10,000 customers at the time. And a good product, like a really good product. Klaviyo has always been a really good product. It's gotten more sophisticated over the years, but it was always been a really good product. Generated good word of mouth. And my mission, I was hired by Andrew Bielecki, who's the CEO founder, and Steve Wytrecki, who at the time was the CRO. I was hired with a very specific mission. there had been no leader of a partnerships function. There was an agency team. And I think the agency team might have been 5 or 6 people, mostly in partner manager roles, and they were fielding leads from agencies. So I didn't bring that motion to Klaviyo. Agencies were already bringing Klaviyo business. However, there was no strategy, really. There was a very basic agency program. There was no thought or strategy around how app partners or tech partners could play a role for Klaviyo. And there was no real strategy around how to approach Shopify and the e-commerce platforms around them. That was my job. So I was hired specifically to develop what the strategy should be, an ecosystem strategy, not just grow the agency business, but like staring back at the e-commerce ecosystem, which we both know really well, how do all these players fit together and how do they all help merchants, and how do we complement each other? How do we add value to them? How do they add value to us? That was my job to figure out. And that's what I did. And, I built an ecosystem. The first thing I did is I changed the name of the team from the agency team to the partnerships team.
Yep.
Because I knew that my strategy was bigger than agencies. And, and then Klaviyo started to grow and partners became more and more central to the business and we were off to the races. But that's what I walked into in 2019.
Super helpful framing. And so we'll keep it going. So then obviously we if you fast forward, we know how kind of things panned out, but we love on this show to like really unpack the inflection points, those like, rate limiting steps or the biggest barriers that, were the highest leverage once you overcame them. So I'm curious if you can recall, like, what was the first major friction or internal battle or just major obstacle that once you overcame that, things just started to feel easier? You finally had the tailwind instead of the headwind. Is there anything you can recall, maybe even the first year or two of going from like agency program to like full-fledged ecosystem-led division, so to speak, where it's like we came up against this Goliath of a challenge. Once we overcame it, seemingly momentum just started to really snowball.
Yeah. I think there's a clear one in my experience at Klaviyo. So, for those of your listeners who are in e-commerce, particularly in the Shopify ecosystem, we're all aware of Shopify's partner program and Shopify Plus partner program and various requirements that Shopify makes of its partners, the rev-share components of those partnerships, etc. So, about when I joined in April of 19, about 6 months after I joined, Shopify wanted to renegotiate our partnerships, which was just a basic rev-share partnership. It wasn't particularly complicated agreement. It was just rev-share in return for being in their app store.
Yep.
And at the time, they were really increasing the cost, the rev-share cost for Shopify Plus to be part of the Shopify Plus program. And they were very aggressive about essentially a price increase for Klaviyo to do business. But the business reality at Klaviyo was so much of our customer base were Shopify brands. And Shopify was the growing e-commerce platform, like still is. Shopify was already starting to eat the e-commerce universe. Magento's business, BigCommerce's business, Salesforce's business, maybe not Salesforce back then, but you get the point, WooCommerce. And so we had a dilemma at Klaviyo. The dilemma was none of us liked this price increase. None of us liked this dependence on Shopify as a source for our business. But where else were we going to find the kind of growth that we're going to find?
Yep.
And so my position with our CEO and with Steve, the CRO, was, I think we need to absorb at least a portion of this price increase. Of course, we negotiated and got the best we could do, with the idea that we would leverage that into a broader, more strategic conversation with Shopify about, hey, does it really make sense for us to come at each other every 12 months about rev-share when we have, thousands and thousands of shared Shopify Plus customers? Sure, Klaviyo was the smaller fish, so we were more dependent, if you will, on Shopify.
Right.
But we had thousands of their biggest and best brands. So there was a little more leverage in the relationship. It might not have been even or equal, but it was a little more leverage there. And I said, my position internally was, let's absorb the price increase for these reasons and use it to open the door to a much more long-term strategic discussion with Shopify, where we can put a multi-year agreement in place and where we can co-develop products together and wherever it went. And it ended up going in a place where Shopify became an investor in Klaviyo. Shopify and Klaviyo are seen, I think, as peas in a pod in the ecosystem.
Definitely.
And it's worked really well for both companies. The concept I would give you is that we wanted to bring Shopify so close to Klaviyo that it would be hard for them to ever pull us apart. And that was the strategy I advocated for. And despite the fact it required a bit of a price increase on rev-share at the front end, I was able to get that done, and it did open that door, and that deal did get done, and Shopify is an investor in Klaviyo, and the rest is kind of history.
The rest is history, but it is legitimate history that is well chronicled. And watching it firsthand happen, it seemed inevitable to all of us. But I'm sure when you're in the trenches, it wasn't inevitable based on how you just recalled that story. So
no, it wasn't inevitable. In fact, it was worse than not inevitable. Whatever the words
right.
are there, Chris. Because my Andrew, the CEO, I thought there was a good chance I was going to get fired in that period
wow.
of time
wow.
because the price increase was really unpalatable.
Just puts a big strain on what you need to bring in to make up the difference.
Yeah, for sure. But we got through that, and I was there for 5 years.
I love that. I mean, one of the highlights of my e-commerce career was at Shopify Unite 2024. Andrew, Toby, on stage giving the keynote. I was literally 20 feet away. I was literally there early, and that was quite a conversation. They honestly talked a little bit about kind of the evolution. They didn't paint it as this intense period. It was very rosy, but it's cool to hear the inside out of that. One last question on this before we move on to the next piece is, okay, a lot of people listening in the e-com space are like, oh, I want to do the same thing with Shopify, but we're not Klaviyo. We're not the size of Klaviyo. We're not the size of Klaviyo when you did this years ago. So can you think of one specific tip you would leave our audience who maybe is at, a Series A to Series C e-commerce ISV, and they want to do the same thing that you did? Any specific advice? Because there's certainly a lot of people in our audience that are working at these companies, the Gorgeouses of the world. We're like, wow, I would really love to hitch my wagon, so to speak, to Shopify much more strategically than just a standard partner agreement.
Yeah, I've gotten this question before.
Sure.
Not,
I'm sure.
not surprisingly.
Rich, how did you do it?
Yeah, we're right. And of course, I got lucky in some ways, and the timing was everything, whatever. But I would never have been able to get that Shopify partnership off the ground, the strategic partnership off the ground, if Klaviyo hadn't already proven that it was the best product market fit for Shopify brands. Truly. Shopify, obviously they're a publicly traded company. The economics matter. They're trying to make money, but they are still a very merchant focused culture and a product focused culture. And in a lot of ways, Klaviyo's culture is the same. You saw Andrew and Toby on stage. You probably could pick up, there's a lot of cultural similarities.
100%.
And so, because the product was so great for Shopify brands, that opened the door to a broader discussion. If we hadn't had that, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere. We just have a standard relationship. So I guess the advice there is it's not going to be very rewarding, but the advice is you got to build a great product for Shopify brands and show Shopify why it's the best product in the market.
that last piece. So thanks for that, Rich. That literally the last like 6 or so words, show them. I think that's an underrated piece of it, Rich. I think there's like, I cut my teeth in tech partnerships. It's amazing how many truly powerful integrations exist in the market, but either side doesn't do a good enough job actually showcasing it and over communicating that impact. So there are for sure, there's over 10,000 apps in the Shopify app marketplace. There are for sure many more apps in that marketplace that actually have a kick-ass product and integration, are delivering world-class outcomes to Shopify Plus merchants, but they don't have the vehicle, so to speak, to convey that message, which honestly comes down to relationships. If you don't have, the great connections to the influential leaders, say at a Shopify, then you're shooting yourself in the foot, because that message is never going to get radiated down to the merchant facing reps at Shopify, which really matters. So I like that you said, show them. You have to show them.
You do. You have to show them. I think that's right. And the other thing I would add to what you said, Chris, is that this is where your ecosystem thinking can really help, because the Shopify universe is a pretty strong echo chamber. Brands talk to agencies, agencies talk to apps, apps talk to brands, agencies talk to apps. Like it all just echoes around the Shopify universe.
Yep.
The more that Shopify is hearing about your app, Chris, from their key agency partners,
yep,
their key app partners, and of course their brands, that's when you're going to start to chip away.
I think that's where Klaviyo. I think that's totally right. And I think that's one thing that Klaviyo did exceptionally well. You didn't just activate thousands of agencies, including like the best in the world, so to speak, the domains and the AVEXs of the world, but you parlayed that in this like triangulation play with Shopify. So like all of their key accounts that Shopify was breaking into, they knew they could go find the right service partner and Klaviyo, right? And then vice versa. So there's just this flywheel that just started to build. Like whoever's first in the deal, bring the others in, and then we'll make sure that we get this deal done.
Yep.
Sweet.
Yep.
Cool. So that's great. So now I want to go, that's more strategic kind of process side of things. Now I want to talk about the people, which is my favorite topic, because, AI doesn't run the world just yet. People still do. So curious, we have a lot of people who listen in who are, head of partnerships, VP partnerships, and maybe they're staffing a department for the first time, or maybe they're trying to take a department to a bigger size than they ever have. So I'm curious, as much as you can remember, how did you kind of approach sequencing and staffing, like who to hire, when, and for what? And then the next question will be like, what roles seemingly made the biggest difference at each stage? But just at the beginning, you get hired. There's already 6 or so agency people. You get this big unlock with Shopify. How did you think about sequencing and staffing? Because I feel like as a first-time leader myself, that was one of the scariest things to manage. And I never managed a department as big as you. So just curious if you can walk the audience through how you approach that.
Sure. I'll start first with like a hiring profile.
Sure.
When you're early on building a new team, or you're at a new company, right, a startup company, and you're making those first few hires, I prefer to hire for versatility. Like I know that we're about to go on a change journey, hopefully because of growth, right? Like, I know this thing is going to grow. Like, of course I've got the right strategies. This thing is going to grow. And so the role that this person is taking on today is not going to be the same role in 6, 12, 18 months. I know that. And so I'm hiring for people at that stage who I have confidence will have the versatility to grow into different things, different title, not just promotions. I mean, like literally like new functions within partnerships. And so how does that translate? It translates into like someone's learning orientation. I'm much more likely at that stage to hire someone who worked at another company where they had to learn the space really quickly and they achieved some level of success, than someone who's run partnerships the same way at 3 different places, because that's not that job. So in terms of profile, that's what I would say. Then in terms of the team and the organization itself, here's an insight that I'll share with anybody who will listen to me. One of the unlocks at Klaviyo was investing early in partner enablement.
Preach.
And it's a hard battle to fight at an early stage company. It really is, because your CEO or your CRO or whoever is going to say, well, don't we have a sales enablement team, or why do we need partner enablement? And I'm specifically talking about agency partners because that's where we focus in those early days with enablement. But don't agencies know what Klaviyo is and how to sell us? Why do we need agency enablement? But thank goodness that I was able to maybe persuasively write using my legal skills to get those dollars, because partner enablement, as I know you know this, Chris, but just so everyone is clear, is a huge leverage unlock. You invest $1 in a partner enablement hire, you get $5 back from the partners they go then enable. And sales enablement is not the same as partner enablement. And I know you know that. But so anyway, I think that is one of the biggest pieces of learning for me in my early days at Klaviyo.
I mean, look, I'm thrilled to hear you say that. The partner enablement people here are just sipping wine right now, toasting to that, because it's about time they get their due. We could spend a whole hour on that. But the one thing I'll say there is, I couldn't agree more. Some of the best and most impactful hires I've ever made are partner enablement people like Kendall Monteith. Shout out to you, former colleague. And what that allows you to do is it allows your quota-carrying partner managers to be way more aggressive, right? And not have to be bogged down by things that, quite frankly, they don't actually have the natural skills to pull off, but it's a huge time suck. It's a huge statement to your partners. It's like, hey, look, you don't just have this quota-carrying partner manager that's going to, meet with you at these events and chase deals together. You have this bona fide enablement person who's going to give you all the resources and then some that you need to be successful in selling into Klaviyo accounts, servicing Klaviyo customers. So yeah, it's just this tremendously versatile resource. And I think, to your point, the CROs of the world, they think, why can't the partner managers do it? Why can't sales enablement do it? Why can't partner marketing do it? Why can't someone spin up an LMS and put them into some half-baked partner portal? But you and I both know it doesn't work. So we're thrilled to hear that the partner enablement's getting the love that they deserve.
They deserve it.
Sweet. So next, okay, you start getting these key hires in.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the training, right? Because it's hard enough to find great talent, right? Like that's a skill and an art form in and of itself. But when you get them in, I think of hiring new employees just the same as I think about when SaaS companies bring on new customers, right? Like the churn is highest in those first few months in many cases. So you have to avoid failure to launch. So I'm curious, obviously, you had several management layers beneath you, so you wouldn't have been responsible for necessarily like onboarding all of these new reps. But I'm curious, how did Klaviyo and your partner team approach onboarding and skill development for the people you brought in, right? Obviously, you're hiring great people who are versatile, who can be self-taught. So in a startup environment, they have to be somewhat self-serving. But I'm curious, over the years, did you and the team approach making sure that new hires got sufficiently onboarded and were provided with the necessary ongoing skill development to evolve and stay productive over the years?
Yeah. So I think Klaviyo would have its own like Klaviyo trainings and Klaviyo onboarding and learning the product or this, that, and the other thing. But that's not what you mean. You mean the partner specific stuff. And the way that we tackled that early on, so like before Klaviyo was an $800 million ARR business in the latter days that I was there. But in my earlier days, the way we did it was really peer-based. It was really peer-based onboarding and joining fellow partner managers for their meetings, for their calls on a trip, going to partner marketing organized events, getting exposure to our partners in non-sales environments, like not that where they were expected to do anything other than be absorbing and learning.
Yep.
And so pairing up, which is kind of unfair. It's probably an unfair thing for me to ask our high-performing partner managers to give up some of their time to spend with, an onboarding partner manager. But I just think it's so bespoke, company by company. that I really felt like that was the best way to onboard people. And then, with even when we were a small team, joining, like I would join calls, partner manager calls early on just to do my own coaching and assessment. And then
Yep.
as our team got bigger, then a manager under me would join those calls for people who are onboarding.
Got it. No, I think we appreciate the transparency, and I think that's as good as approaches you can have. And I like the idea of pairing them up with the top performers. Like, yeah, it takes a little bit from the top performers, but gives them mentorship opportunities. And then if you're going to pair them with anybody, it should be with the top performers. So I think that's a sound approach. So I think we're good on the Klaviyo side. Obviously, I wish I could spend even more time on that, but we definitely covered a lot there. Now I want to pivot to your pivot, so to speak, and talk about the latest and greatest news of you deciding to join Pavilion as their president, right? So This is obviously blockbuster news that made a lot of headlines. First question for you, Rich, is what made Pavilion the mission that you ultimately said yes to, right? And why this role at this time?
Yep. Well, I'll give you a couple of reasons. So one is I'm a big believer in Pavilion's mission. So for those of you who don't know, those of your listeners who don't know, Pavilion is a private community of go-to-market operating executives. So if you're a VP of sales or chief partnerships officer or CMO or whatever, you join Pavilion and you can tap into the community in two ways. You can take advantage of some of the online learning stuff like Chief Revenue Officer School, or you can tap into events that we host, like these dinners that happen locally in major markets around the world. And I'm a big believer, Chris, in peer-to-peer learning. Takes us back a few minutes to when I was just talking about how I onboarded partner managers, but I'm a big believer in peer-to-peer learning. There's only so much you can learn from an article or a book. A lot of what we have to learn, especially as we get farther down the road in our careers, is from people who've done it or been in our shoes. And that's the need that Pavilion fulfills. It's helping to put the right people in the right rooms to have the right conversations. And I'm just a big believer in that. The second thing that I would say, though, is we're in a time when you can't throw a rock without hitting someone who's talking about AI. Everybody's AI this, AI that, and it's real. Like there's real stuff happening, okay? A lot of hype, but there is some real stuff happening too. Pavilion is about humans. Pavilion is about human connection and learning from each other. And I love the counter trend nature of that. I think it's only going to get harder and more precious to have these human moments. And that's what Pavilion does. So that's what drew me. The role itself, look, you and I talked about this a while back in Chicago. I think partnerships leaders have to be mini CEOs. We have to understand marketing and sales and product and yes, partnerships, customer success. We have to understand all of it. Finance. And so the president role really is just an embodiment of what you and I talked about in Chicago. Like it's my job essentially to oversee all of go-to-market and operations. But I did some of that as a head of partnerships at Klaviyo.
Yep. Well, first of all, congrats again, Rich. Obviously huge news. Selfishly as a partner person, I'm thrilled that, you joining the leading community for all GTM professionals has a partnership hat on. So I think that's good news for everyone in the partnerships community.
For sure.
A little bit of bias there, but you mentioned a little bit about the role and a little bit of the mission, but curious if you can be a bit more specific on perhaps like what a North Star might look like. Let's just focus on 2026. And what do you see as perhaps the biggest challenge, as much as you're willing to share on that front?
Yeah, the biggest challenge for the Pavilion community is similar to some other professional communities. And that is that, as these private communities get larger, it's harder and harder to maintain focus on ICP, on mission, on member experience. And it can result in trying to do too many things for too many different types of people and not doing enough of them well. And so as Pavilion has grown over the last almost 10 years and gotten larger, 10,000 members, it's harder to maintain that focus.
Right.
So my mission at Pavilion is to drive focus and thereby elevate the member experience. Because if we're doing fewer things for fewer types of professionals, we will do them better.
I like that. I'm a big fan of keep it simple. And I want to dive a little bit more into kind of some of the ethos and core messaging and positioning with Pavilion, which I've been following for years. Something that you've said, and I know Sam is big on, is, this concept of like short tenures are now the new norm, unfortunately, for a lot of these execs and C-suite. So next question for you is, why are CROs and CMOs burning out faster than ever, right? Like more than they already were.
Well, it's always been tough for CROs and CMOs. Go-to-market leaders, we're always at the front lines, right? Trying to drive growth, getting unreasonable expectations set for us by boards and CEOs. Like, that's part of the nature of the beast. Yep. What's different now, though, is technology disruption, AI disruption is eliminating entire functions. It's changing entire functions. It's freezing budgets at companies, right or wrong. Like, CEOs expect now that AI is going to drive 20% productivity across their business and telling sales leaders they can't hire any SDRs. So I think we still have all of the revenue pressure that we were getting all along. And now we've got this incredible disruption and uncertainty around us. It makes it really hard to be a go-to-market operator right now, Chris. And what I would say for all of us as we go into 2026 is, none of us has been an operating executive in 2026. None of us know really what to expect. There are no playbooks. There are no playbooks.
Yeah.
And I that might sound a little dramatic, but it's actually how I feel. And so for your listeners, the way I think about myself and what I would give advice to friends and to your listeners is, we have to be professionally resilient.
Yeah.
Like, we as leaders, as operating executives, need to be resilient because the changes are happening. And if we let the changes throw us off our focus, we will fail.
So we appreciate that. The last question on that one, Rich, is, if I was to tell you, let's just focus on partnerships. If I was to tell you that, an increase of VP of partnerships get let go in 2026, like, let's just say, the average tenure for VP partnerships is 18 months. And then in 2026, it's 12 months, right? Like, in your estimation, I know you said they have to be resilient, but if we go a step further, if I was to say, hey, Rich, I can see the future, VP of partnerships in particular, or even chief partnerships officers, they just take a beating next year. And I tell you, I can see the future. What would be your prediction of why, if you can be as acute and specific as possible? Thinking about partnerships, thinking as a partnership executive, what might be the reason that they, have a really tough year next year? It's because they didn't do blank, or they did do blank, and that was a bad idea. Asking for a little Nostradamus from you here.
Well, I think the biggest risk for roles like chief partnership officer, and frankly, even chief customer officer,
fair,
is they get absorbed into the chief revenue officer's function and role.
That's a totally different beast.
Yeah, I do think that, because I'm a partnerships person, right? So no one should be offended by me saying this, but partnerships and customer success are often seen as ancillary to sales, right? Right or wrong, that's just how the world operates. And because these large companies are trying to drive productivity and efficiency, I think there's a dynamic happening right now where some of these ancillary functions are going to be absorbed into the CRO function. So to answer your question very specifically, the CPO job might go away because the CRO is expected to do that job.
Got it. Yep. That totally tracks. And so I think going back to your early advice of like, you need to speak the language, have a firm understanding of the budget, the P&L, the unit economics. I think that can de-risk you.
I'll give you 5 things. If you want to survive, if you want to put yourself in the best position to survive.
There we go.
You got to be AI native. Like you need to show and prove that you know how to use AI tools to drive productivity and impact at your business. You need to be P&L fluent, which we talked about earlier. You need to be tech forward, like you need to be looking for ways to bring more technology into your business and not just hiring people. You need to be resilient, to my point a few minutes ago, and you need to be cross-functional. There's no more silos, Chris. There's no more silos.
No. Nowhere to hide.
And so you got to understand how it all works.
I mean, that's even if I just recorded that last 60 seconds or so, this would be a valuable episode in and of itself. But I think that's great. The last question for you here, Rich, on the Pavilion front, I just want to go back to what you said about kind of the human element of the community that Pavilion has, because that's something near and dear to my heart. To be honest, I get really burned out by all of this, like building AI to help AI get better, right? Because it just to me paints this dystopian future where we're useless, right? And I think not to get too emotional about it, but I think that's going to lead to some severe depression, even for people who are highly skilled, highly educated. So I'm a big fan of like, hey, why don't we keep building AI to empower people, not just build AI to help AI help AI? So go back to your comment. You said Pavilion is about, authentic human connection. So how do you scale that without losing it, right? Like, implicitly as you build a community, quite literally, each member is technically diluted, so to speak, in terms of their voice and just like what percentage of the overall community they represent. So how does Pavilion and how will you approach as president really trying to maintain deeper, authentic human connections whilst obviously you're trying to scale the business and therefore scale the member base? Just curious how you and Pavilion might think about that conceptual challenge.
I'm sick of talking about scale. I really am. I think a business like Pavilion is doing unscalable things and doing human things. So I'll answer your question. Pavilion this year will have done 600 dinners around the world.
Wow.
600 dinners. Let's say there are 20 people at each dinner. That's what? 12,000 people who came through chapter dinners. And that's 20 people across 2 tables having a single conversation at each table about shit that matters. What are they scared of? What don't they know how to do? How do they deal with a crazy CEO? Like so to answer your question, the way you make a community of 20,000 or 10,000 feel more human and connected is you just shrink it down to these little moments, these experiences, not moments, experiences,
right?
Like the dinners. And you know what? People have been having dinner for thousands of years, Chris. Like it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
But you put people under so much pressure, like we all are together around a table.
Yep.
And just watch the authentic moments happen.
Got it. I mean, I love the contrarian view of like, you're basically saying F scale, like let's just make sure that we're like taking care of what we already have. So I'm a big fan of that. And I love the grassroots approach of like, hey, look, Pavilion has infrastructure in place. You have all these great chapters. So you have the hubs, so to speak, connected to the spokes. So I think that's great. Cool. Well, look, we are at time. I just want to thank you, Rich, so much for jumping on here. I love going through the Klaviyo story. Super excited about what you're going to be building with the Pavilion team. And so if you're not following Rich, I definitely recommend you check him out on LinkedIn, and certainly stay tuned, and certainly encourage you to check out Pavilion if you're not already a member, because it's a great community band. So Rich, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much, Chris. Great to see you and great to be with your audience.
Cool.